in the context of the people who are assembled here for this interaction, I think we can go straight to the heart of what yoga represents. Because one of the problems of the current popularity of yoga is that we have to always dilute what it represents to be able to meet the popular expectation, and I will even say popular demand. There's a marketplace of yoga, and the marketplace wants you to reduce it to a level where it can be bought and transacted. Unfortunately, that is also necessary, perhaps as an entry point for many to enter the deeper ranges of what yoga represents. But nevertheless, when you hear somebody say, and casually, oh yes, I'm taking care of my health, I practice yoga 20 minutes a day, somewhere it hurts because the word is utterly misused. And so the theme which I had selected for our discussion today is yoga as a science and technology of transformation. And I'm going to be very specific about the use of these words and why I've used the word transformation, because we normally associate even the deeper sense of yoga as primarily centered on liberation. And while that is also true, it is not the complete sense of the word. We have to recognize, going to the Sanskrit root, yoga as union with that, the ultimate, the divine, the absolute, the transcendent, the universal, as well as the divine in the individual. All these are included in the yoga union with the divine. There is nowhere in this the sense of an exclusive union in a transcendence alone. There is also the union with the immanence of the divine. There's also the union with the divine which is uniquely present in each one of us. And the implications of that union are enormous, because at the moment you realize that the divine is within you, or rather even that your own most essential and deepest reality is one in that divinity, the implications follow naturally. And you could ask, what is then the rest of me? Because you can, of course, take a trenchant, a cutting position that says, I am only that and not this. And yet the person who went to realize that was first this. And you do not cease to be this when you realize that. Even in a state of realization, you spoke a needle on your foot, well, you will still say, yes, I do feel a sensation and it bleeds and it is happening within my consciousness. So in an individual realization where you are one with the divine, you do not cease to be one with the part of you that is engaged with the world and in the world. Equally, when you experience the oneness of divinity in universality, and you experience literally your consciousness as vast as the universe, and even you experience the universe within you, you experience yourself in all beings and all beings within you at the same time. In that universality of the consciousness, or even opening to a still greater, I will use the word cosmic consciousness, you do not cease to be this individual, nor do you cease to be that stone which is out there, or the physical reality of the Mother Earth, while you may experience a deeper spiritual reality equally. And so you could again make a trenchant distinction saying that alone is divine, and therefore by consequence this becomes either illusory or it becomes a domain of suffering which is then to be rejected. But you could ask, where did this illusion come from, or where did this domain of suffering come from? And we will say it comes back from that in some form. It is a reflection of that or a part of that. And still the question remains then, why is it all there? And if we recognize that our universality of the experience in yoga also embraces the universe, or even pours out into the universe with a tremendous creative power, which is the original sense of the word Maya, the creative power which measures out relativities out of the absolute, then again the question remains, what happens to this when I am in that? Even when we experience the divine as transcendent, we live in a consciousness which is beyond space and beyond time, and we are one with the divine in that transcendence, beyond relativities, in an absolute, which is the goal of the Buddhist realization, for example, and other traditions. In that absolute, You do not experience relativities as other. Rather, relativities are contained in the totality of the Absolute. You could again create a trenchant separation, and the relativities again become either a domain of suffering or illusory or even non-existent or a secondary reflective reality. Nevertheless, the question remains, what do you do with it when you are one with that divinity? And I'm going to go straight to the consequence of pursuing this line of exploration is that divine does not separate itself from this reality or this world which is on the surface. However much you may call it superficial, however much you may call it limited, however much you may call it a domain of ignorance and dualities, that divine still contains this and is immanent within this. The question then remains, when I live in my diviner part of me, the rest of me which does not live in the diviner part, what happens to it? And many of the ascetic traditions have simply said you discard it, and at the time of death you finally merge and never again return. But again, the deeper sense is not satisfied. Why did you even get in if the whole goal was to discard and remove? Or why did the divine itself express in this or through this? Why is it immanent here if the whole goal is to dissolve this? And the implication of this pursuit is that all of this too is an expression of the divine, and although currently an insufficient, limited, distorted, and even erroneous expression of the divine, yet it is an expression of the divine which is progressively growing to express greater and greater possibilities of the totality of the divine. And we come here to one of the fundamental declarations in the Vedic tradition, Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahman. All this verily is the divine. And this includes materiality, even including the body and the cells and the atoms. This also is divine. If you recall, in the Upanishadic tradition, the young child of the Rishi is asked to meditate, to realize the divine. He is asked to meditate on that which is the origin of all things, that which sustains all things, that into which all things merge. And after a period of concentration and meditation, dwelling on this quest, he comes back and says, Annam Brahman. And the Rishi says, very good. He does not say wrong. He says, very good. Go further, go deeper. And as you know, he goes through Pranam Brahman, Mano Brahman, Vijnanam Brahman, Anandam Brahman. Going through these, each of these represents as if a layer of the reality. But when reaching the highest, one does not discard these. Rather, one sees these as aspects, layers of expression of the Brahman. And you do not know Brahman if you know only that or only this. You must know the totality of all these to know Brahman as he knows himself. You could make a choice that I will know Brahman only in its transcendence, only in its existence outside space and time, and thereby extinguish my awareness of these things. But your extinguishing your awareness of these things does not make these things go away. Because the others who are embodied will still experience these things. So it's more as if you chose to become unconscious or unaware or ignore an aspect of the reality of the Brahman because that was your choice, not because that was the complete experience of Brahman. And so if you asked yourself, how would Brahman experience Brahman? And when you seek to realize that, that's when you have the complete experience of Brahman, not your decision that says, I will only know Brahman's transcendence and not his immanence. So this is the point Sri Aurobindo makes, that when you look at the world from this perspective, the entire manifestation, and we won't use the word creation, because the creation has a very limited sense. As it comes in the Abrahamic tradition, the creator and the created are separate. But a manifestation, the one that is, flows out to become what he is. And the infinite potential, Ananta Gunam, flows to fill and unfold in this flow of the manifestation. Because it is Ananta Gunam, whatever is manifested is never complete. There is always more. And the more is not merely a mechanical sum. It's like you count 1, 2, 3, 4 and you keep on going to infinity, but they are all equivalent finally in the relativity. What manifests from the divine is always greater than everything that has been manifested. In other words, all that you could imagine falls short of what still remains in the Ananta Guna to manifest, and will manifest at some point and surprise you because it is beyond your conception. And when you have included that in your conception or grown into it, again then something else will manifest which will surprise you further. And that is the sense of Ananta Guna. And these revelations, series of revelations of the divine manifesting, become what we experience as evolution. Because every time there is this breakthrough into something which was never possible even, which was thought impossible, and that manifests, that is a step in evolution. So if you look at it very objectively, what you see at first in the bursting out of the delight of Brahman to manifest, and all comes from the delight, Anandam Brahman. From that bursting out, you have first the experience of the world as Annam. And in the character of matter which is dead, insensitive, unable to move, inertia in darkness is its character, you could never have imagined something that moves or which expresses consciousness or even which communicates. And out of that stone, somehow by a miraculous leap, we have the manifestation of what we call prana, and which is characteristically expressed in matter as plant life. What is plant? Think about it. What is plant made of? You look at a plant in a pot, you put a seed inside and then you put water and soil and a little bit of air and sunlight. But primarily the substantiality of it is the soil and the water, and the seed takes that soil and water, mud, and rearranges it to become eventually not only the stem, not only the leaf, but the beautiful flower, none of which have anything in common with the nature of that mud from which they came. You look at a plant and you will say it is rearranged molecules of mud, isn't it? But what makes plant plant? It is not a rearranged molecule. There's something fundamentally new which does not exist in soil, or at least is not manifest in soil. And as that manifests, it takes the material and transforms it, makes it undergo the very character of its form to become plant substance. And as transformed soil, you know plant. And when plant loses that thing which infused into it, the prana content, the prana withdraws, the plant collapses, becomes dead leaves. Still it is transformed soil. It is not the same as soil. Eventually it gets mixed into soil as mulch. Still it is not the same soil. After that you say the soil is fertile. Something has been infused in the very nature of matter, fundamentally changed by the infusion of life energy, to have become no more dead matter mud. It has become fertile soil with organic content in it. It's fundamentally changed. And of course, out of that, plants will grow more quickly, more easily, will be more rich and more diverse, and so on. So the infusion of prana into anna is able to draw out and create forms which are fundamentally different, and we call that transformation. But out of that plant substance, what happens next in the animal body? And I will take the most evolved animal among us, which is the human. Most evolved in consciousness. Of course, there are others which are better evolved in terms of their love and affection, maitri and compassion and all those things. But we are more evolved in degree of self-awareness. What are we made of? Biologically, we eat the plants. Even if you eat animal, the animal ate the plant. And what are the plants? Mud. So we are mud which was first transformed by life force, by prana, and then again taken up by conscious awareness, manomaya. The mana Brahman has taken this pranamaya, which has taken up annamaya, and now retransformed it to a higher gradation, and your tissue, your hand, is actually rearranged mud molecules, rearranged plant molecules. And yet there's fundamentally something new here. You are conscious in yourself. You're aware of your own awareness, and you're able to shape yourself according to the will of your awareness, spontaneously, almost instantaneously. To the degree that you can even observe your own consciousness and say, today I'm feeling dull, and you can pull yourself out of the dullness to become extra conscious, highly conscious, intensely conscious. This is great. And we do this all the time. Every time you have a presentation, you have a special program, you have to meet somebody very important, or your life or your career depends on it, you pull yourself to your peak awareness capability. And then afterwards you come away, wow, that was great. And then you sink back to your norm. But what is that norm? That norm, which was normal at the age of 5, is not norm at the age of 10, is not norm at the age of 20, is not norm at whatever your peak of 30, 40, 50 might be. And having hit a peak, there's a kind of a decline again. But even in your decline, if you continue to train yourself, you can will yourself out or never decline ever. This variation is within your power to change. Plants cannot do that. Animals cannot do that. Stone, of course, cannot. This power of the Manah Brahman aspect, the power of the Manomaya consciousness taking up life force and matter and reshaping it into its terms, brings it to a level of awakening in which now this thinking brain, conscious body, mind can actually say, what's next? Not only it can conceive of what's next and change to become something more, it can conceive of the next step, which it is not yet capable of on its own. This is why in the Veda we have this extraordinary description of how all these creatures are being created, and they say, yes, this is good, but not good enough. And when the human being is first created, then they say, yes, this is a worthy vehicle for us to enter. And each of the deities takes up a station in different parts of our being as psychological powers, leading our further evolution to the next. And what is the next? And you see, in the unfolding of the sequence, it's always going up the chain, the scale of consciousness, towards the totality always. It's never this abandoning that. As our mind has embedded itself, it has embedded into living matter. It has not abandoned matter. So to the very next level that comes, and if you follow the sequence in the Upanishad, we have the next level as being the Vijnanamaya. The Vijnanam takes up the Manomaya and the Prana and the Annamaya, that is the mind, life, body, and raises it to its terms, recasts it, transforms it into its terms. What will that substance be like? Not only will it be conscious, it will be super conscious. But the nature of Vijnana we have to recognize. And here I have to take a slight detour of explanation, because Vijnanam is not merely what we have normally been taught in our textbooks. That is just like the word yoga has over time been somewhat reduced in its popularization. The term Vijnanam also has been reduced and is currently associated primarily with the intellect. If you look at the Vedic text and you go back to its original sense, Vijnanam is not intellect. It is described as the Satyam, the Ritam, the Brihat. These are the three terms used to describe Vijnanam. Satyam as truth. Is your mind capable of even truth? It is so bound in duality, is incapable of truth. Any truth you can articulate is always made false by a greater truth, which is then made false by a still greater, more complete truth. This is not domain of truth. Ritam is the dynamic flowing out in rhythms of that truth in forms, in manifestation, in flowing, changing circumstance. Our mind is not capable of that. And then Brihat, vast, infinite. Our mind is not capable of infinity. You cannot even conceive of infinity. You can conceive of an idea of infinity, but you cannot imagine infinity itself. Just as an exercise, try to visualize or conceive of the infinite, and in your mind you will picture something very large, and then something larger and larger and larger, but always it is finite, growing more and more big. It's never free of boundaries. You can only conceive of things bound. So this is not what they meant by the Vijnanamaya. And if Vijnanamaya is described as the next level, then it is certainly not just an epitome of the mind. It represents a different grade of consciousness, and there are extraordinary descriptions in the Veda by which we recognize it as a higher grade, of which our mind is a highly reduced, even reflected status. In our current human experience, the power of intuition is our first glimpse of that Vijnanam, but it is a limited glimpse. In the Veda, the intuitive consciousness is described as the ray of the sun, but not the body of the sun. And it is, the body of the sun is infinite, Brihat, but the ray of the sun is a finite projected ray. When it enters your mind, it gives you a flash of insight. And you see, the nature of that intuition is it knows without needing external support. It knows exactly what it knows without error, flawless. It is truth consciousness. But it is limited. It knows what it knows and knows that it does not know beyond this boundary. So, although limited, it is true. And although limited, it is capable of error-free knowing. Knowing its own limits, it can say, beyond this, I will make error. I don't know. But in the description of the Veda, what you see in the Rishi's experience is not one flash of lightning of the intuition, but a series of flashes, each growing larger, giving you knowledge as necessary. This power actually exists in all of us. It exists in us as a functioning power which is not organized and of which you are not conscious. I'll give an example. Very simple test you can do. I ask you to remember the first time that you found a special stone or a shell on the sea beach. Or you went to the high peak of a mountain and looked down and had the experience of this vast valley below. Any incident. Remember the first time. And perhaps it takes you 2 or 3 seconds and you say, yes, this is it. If you had to do a Google search of your Facebook history to say, which is my first photo of a valley or a beach, the search would actually go through every single one of your photos. And having found, it will isolate what are the various beach pictures until it finds the earliest and then say, now this is earliest because there is no other earlier one. It actually has to go through every single photo. But when your mind went to look for it, you didn't go through every single memory. You didn't even bother about other memories. You just turned to know and pop, the memory came out. Now this faculty is extraordinary. If you observe what's actually happening, you decided that you wanted to know, you turned into yourself to know, but you didn't search. Something inside pushed out the memory and it met your seeking. And then you picked it out and brought it forward. In other words, there is within you a power of mind of which you are not conscious. But it is conscious of you. It knows what you wanted and gave you the memory. But how did it give the memory? It did not go through serially among all the thousands of or millions of memories. It held all memories in a single whole. It's like a parallel processing machine. Every single memory is simultaneously present. And the moment you say, I want this, it simply pushes that part, which it already is, without needing to sequentially search. Anything you seek to know, you turn to know, it knows what you're looking for and pushes forward the memory that you want. Think about what is this extraordinary faculty, which is error-free, knows everything you know and perhaps more than what you're consciously knowing. It can even pull out things you've totally forgotten, things you've forgotten that you forgot. And when those memories pop up, you say, wow, I'd forgotten even about this. I didn't even know it existed within me. What is that extraordinary power of knowing, which does not need to be serial, which is infinite, which is always true and error-free, and is already a part of your mind, but at a secret level? And so this is the very interesting question which is raised in the Kena Upanishad. What is it that directs the mind to go to its mark? Again, I will give you a problem. Let's say a technical question of some kind, whatever your field of expertise. Or if it's just like go to a school child and say, I'm going to give you a problem. And you're going to solve the problem. And halfway through, I come and say, well, how far are you? You will say, I am almost there. Or someone will say, I'm just beginning and I'm getting a hang of where it is, but I'm in the right direction. Now I'm going to ask you a question. If you don't know what the solution is, how do you know you're in the right direction? If you don't know what the solution is, how do you know you're close? And then I may say, how much time do you need? And you'll say, okay, give me 10 more minutes. Definitely in 10 minutes, I'll get it. If you don't know the solution, how do you know you'll get it in 10 minutes? Because something within you already knows. Because it knows, it guides your mind. It is like a magnet moving iron filings. Behind the paper, you hide the magnet, the iron filings will move and dance. But when the filings feel the power of the magnetic field strongly, they say, yes, I'm close. When they feel the pull of the magnetic field, which they cannot see and they cannot see the magnet, they know it is in this direction. So this faculty, and this I will say is the closest we have to the Vijnanam, or rather it's a reflection of the Vijnanam operation in the mind. This faculty and its source, finally the true Vijnanam, is what directs the mind to go to its mark. And this is a fundamental question, the first question the Kena Upanishad raises. And it answers the question also by saying, that which thinks not by the mind, that power by which the mind thinks, that is what it is. So straight away it's pointing you to the Vijnanam as a higher, greater, fundamentally greater power. Not just power of intellect. It is far greater than the intellect. It is power of true knowledge, which is vast, infinite. And so this ray of this coming into us is the intuition, and the intuition flashes to give us insights and guide us. But it always knows, it already is what you're seeking to know. And Sri Aurobindo points out, this is a very interesting insight. He says, one of the peculiarities of the human mind is we are always seeking an ideal. True knowledge, complete knowledge, error-free knowledge, true power, absolute power, effective always, against all resistance. True happiness, which does not have an opposite, which is not bound in dualities. True love, which is not dependent or bound by compulsion or cannot fail. True freedom, that is so free, nothing could bind it. And all these ideals which we have, justice. What is justice? You try to formulate it, you'll end up with rules which can always be countered. And you go to any court of law, you will never get justice because of the skill of argumentation or biases. You can never do it. And yet we know it is possible. Yet we seek that true love and true justice and true freedom. And why? Because it exists not here in our mind, but in that greater power, which is above the mind. And because mind is an expression of that, it has a faint memory of that. In the manifestation, it is top-down unfolding. It has a memory of its home, and so it seeks that. And the urge within us is never satisfied, although it fails again and again and again in the limitations of finiteness of mind and dualities of mind. It knows there is something greater, which is beyond duality and yet accessible to you. And you know when you approach it. You also know when you depart from it. And so it is something close enough. It's not just a fantasy of some far-off reality. It is close enough that it attracts us constantly. And we feel deepest satisfaction in life when we grow towards these ideals. We lose sense of purpose when we wander away from them. And that tells you something. Your soul came on earth in this incarnation, in these series of births, in this pursuit of divinity, to realize these, and not merely to withdraw, to fulfill, to transform, and to manifest the divine potential. And so we come back to this word transformation. Our mind, having taken up this material and transformed it to the highest that mind can take, it needs now a still greater power to come and take up our mind and life and body and raise these, transform these to its highest potential. And the nature of that transformation is that you will live in the divine consciousness while still participating in the divine manifestation. And this is the true sense of the word Leela, the divine play, the divine delight revealed in forms. And it is held in this very beautiful image of Sri Krishna dancing with the gopis, where we are the soul, the gopis, and the Lord is our master, and each experiences the dance around the Lord, who is the center, who is our true reality. But each experiences uniquely, and together we all dance around that same one divine reality. And it is that revealed splendor of the beauty and the divine harmony which is the nature of this further evolution. So Sri Aurobindo's point is this evolution is not over. We are still continuing. The difference now is we as conscious beings can actively participate and speed it up. The means to do that is the technology that we call yoga. Now, yoga is not merely a technology, it is equally a science, and the distinction is important. You see, a technology can be applied without understanding how. We all use technology. You use the mobile phone. You don't know the chips and the circuitry, and you don't care. You can even design a chip and make it without knowing the science of how it operates. But when you have the science, you can develop the technology, you can modify it, you can master it. Yoga gives you both. There are those who focus only on the technology. There are those who move on and seek to know the science also, and thereby be even free of technological limitations and even develop new technologies to attain to the same outcome. So I'm going to touch upon these briefly because we are short on time, and then we'll see how things unfold according to interests from your questions. But if we understand these gradations of consciousness and the nature of reality as an essential divine unfolding through so many layers and levels, through so many aspects and processes, that's your understanding, which is the science. Modern physical science is only a very narrow part of this. If this science could open to understand the pranic processes and the energies and the powers, functions, principles, laws, for lack of a better word, because we are used to that term, but it's not law there, it is much more principles. If you understand the principles on which they work, your physical science would open to a pranic science, which would then open to a manah science, mental science, manomaya, and still higher. But the science itself would be a complete body of knowledge spanning all these strata, levels, worlds, gradations of consciousness, of which physical science is a very narrow, utmost limited portion, and most mechanical because it is only limited to matter. You move up, it is less mechanical, but not less scientific, equally precise, but not mechanical. And this is what we glimpse in some of the quantum physics experiments, where the mind and the intention of the experimenter ends up reflecting in the results of the experiment. It's a first glimpse of these possibilities, but it only stops at the glimpse. So as a body of knowledge, yoga is comprehensive. We must understand that the rishis were not blind. They were visionaries. They lived in that consciousness of that revealed higher, and I will use this word, the Vijnanam, Satyam, Ritam, and Brihat, and the Anandam, in the revealed knowledge. And what they described in the Veda were really experiences that they were having. And they live in the sun, in the substance of the sun, in the totality of the solar revelation, of which these are all secondary. So from a consciousness which is infinite, you can look down at the operations of the mind and describe its principles and operations, and all the way down to matter. But what you also realize in the top-down vision is, while mastering physics and the physical technology is useful, the mastery of the principle behind physics is even more useful. You can now shape matter by the application of will directly. Why would you need machinery involving 1 billion watts of power to break an atom or fuse an atom? You can do it by simple application of mind. And so easily, with no energy practically. And so this is the basis for so many phenomena. And for many yogis, and I'm distinguishing the yogi who does it from an occultist who does it by a different process. The occultist is applying a technology of a different grade without necessarily understanding how he does it. So an occultist can materialize. But a yogi with no prior training can take a material in his hand. And we have these stories, for example, of Vasishta Ganapati Muni. Those of you who may have heard of him, he was the great master who recognized Ramana Maharshi and named him. He holds a coin in his hand as he sits with the children in the relatively poor family with whom he was staying during his sadhana. And as a way of giving back for their expenses, he takes a coin, holds it in his hand as he is narrating stories from the Mahabharata. At the end of the exercise, he gives the coin back, and it has been transformed into gold. How did he do it? He didn't have to study a text. He didn't have to learn incantations. He didn't have to acquire an occult power or the physics or the big machinery which is required to change atomic structures. It was a direct action, top down, of a greater power which can reshape matter just like that, effortlessly. So naturally, to the rishis, that knowledge top down was far greater and more powerful. They did not bother to go into the material perfection of the technology of matter, which is actually the focus today in the last, let's say, 200 years of modern science, which is exclusively concerned with matter, but ignoring these higher ranges. So the knowledge, the science of yoga actually includes all these in a top-down perspective. But the goal of the yogic knowledge is how do you awaken to these higher possibilities of yourself? That's why the Kena asks you, what is it in your mind that makes your mind able to go to its goal? It's trying to get you to realize that. And then, of course, it asks, what is the power which makes your life force move? So, as you awaken to these, there is not only a greater knowledge, a greater consciousness, a greater power of effective action, there's also a greater participation in the delight, because all these are reflections of the Satchidananda. And to live in that Ananda is also one of the goals. But in living in that Ananda is not a rejection of the body, but transformation of your mind, life, and body into this higher, greater, more complete, divine expression. So Sri Aurobindo makes a very clear assertion, which is in full alignment with the Vedic realization. In the Veda, the Rishi says, Ihaiva, here on earth, in the body. In the Kena Upanishad, it is said, if you do not realize that here, then great is your loss. To realize the divine. Even in the Ishopanishad, it is said that it is a wonderful thing to realize this aspect of the divine. It is a wonderful thing to realize that aspect of the divine. And then it says, those who lose themselves into this, that is in the consciousness of division, they enter darkness. And then paradoxically it says, those who lose themselves into that, in the oneness of the divine consciousness, in exclusion to its multiplicity, they go as if into a greater darkness. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why is immersion in the oneness of the divine a greater darkness than awakening to the divine in multiplicity? Because there is nothing in the oneness which will remind you of the multiplicity. But in the multiplicity, you'll always get knocks and pushes to remind you of the oneness. So it is possible to lose oneself by an exclusive focus, but you do not know the divine until you know both. And the Ishopanishad insists that you have to realize the divine in both, in the totality of it. So I come back to this idea of transformation. Life itself has to be transformed, divinized, and Sri Aurobindo insists on this. The ascetic paths which have, so to say, discarded the world were a necessary phase perhaps, in order to attain to a specialized focus, to attain to a higher consciousness, which is so different, so transcendent that you cannot attain it unless you make an exclusive focus, at least for a while. But then after that, one has to turn back and re-engage with this. And so this is the aspect of the science. There is the technology aspect of which we know, we are all familiar. And I'll just take a few minutes to round this up because the discussion wouldn't be complete without it. When we speak of yoga, even as a technology, as an application, we tend, unfortunately, because of the nature of modern education, to isolate in a very narrow focus, of which there's a still narrower focus because that's the only way you can teach people what they are seeking in the popularization, which is good health. So you reduce it to asanas and pranayam. And even that, people say, yeah, but that's not yoga really. That's just a few exercises which are preparatory at best for yoga. So they call it hatha yoga. No, it's not hatha yoga. You have not practiced hatha yoga unless you have used the full set of asana pranayam to help you awaken the centers, the chakras, and awaken the kundalini. And nobody is really doing that, and they're not even competent to do that. So don't call it hatha yoga. It's just asanas and pranayam as a first step. And if you just do asanas and pranayam as a technology, all you have done is amplified the capacities. Yes, you feel tremendously energetic, your mind becomes vibrant, your life energy vibrant, your body in good health, but your personality doesn't change. There is no transformation. There is only amplification. And that's why even in the Yoga Sutras, the sequence first given is Yama Niyama. If you have not done the Yama and Niyama, the asana pranayam will amplify your defects. But even this, as the Ashtanga Yoga, is not complete unless you go all the way to the Samadhi. Samadhi itself is not mere immersion in the oneness transcending the world. It equally includes the full waking Samadhi, where you live in life with eyes open and engaged with living in the presence of the divine. The full waking Samadhi is the goal eventually. But even all this still represents one aspect, Raja Yoga you may say, or Hatha Yoga or Raja Yoga in combination. There are completely different approaches to yoga which have different names or broad categories, which we may describe as Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. These three in particular, which are so explicitly elucidated in the Bhagavad Gita. All three take specific impulses within us and turn them towards the divine and thus attain to the yoga with no resort to asana, pranayam, or any of the other methods. And they all lead to transformation of your consciousness, complete change in your nature. Hatha Yoga uses the body as the primary focus. Raja Yoga uses mind as the primary focus, which also, when done fully, lead you to a transformation and a liberation at the same time of consciousness. And all these five systems of yoga form a totality. When you look at them, they're all complementary. But there's a sixth, which is extremely important, which is the basis, which we call the Tantra approach. And it's not Tantra as taught in the West, which is only the Kama Sutra. It has nothing to do with Tantra. Tantra here represents the principle of surrender to the divine Shakti. In recognition that it is the divine Shakti as power of God, the creative energy which forms the universe, which has really pushed you and your evolution and awakened you to where you are. And it is that Shakti awakened from above which can take you to your source and realization and transformation. Because it is the Shakti working inside you, and her awakening and reshaping you from inside is the true transformation and the true awakening, the true liberation. So these principles now, the Shakti aspect which is brought by the Tantra, and the other five which are the more Vedantic aspects of the yoga knowledge, they are again complementary. Sri Aurobindo articulates the relationship between these six broad categories or aspects of yoga, and this totality is our body or science of yoga and the technology of yoga with six specialized branches. So I'm giving this as a quick gist of the idea, and then depending on the interest, we may take this up in further detail. But this is the broad framework I wanted to set to appreciate yoga truly and to practice it and to understand what it truly represents for humanity. You have to know this big picture. Yoga is not merely for good health, not merely for becoming more aware, more mindful, or more capable within your limited skills. It is a science and a technology of transformation, and transformation is more than change. It is a rising to a fundamentally new grade of existence even. And while we may not attain to that fullness of that grade, even a few steps in that direction is a transformation, of which the first character is your mind is illuminated by a living power of intuition. It is this borderline that we are at in our human evolution, and the mass of humanity, as it chooses to rise, can actually engage and awaken to the intuitive consciousness, which will lead you to the full Vijnanamaya revealed in its infinity. But this is the step we are at, and this is the challenge today. The crisis in the world you see in every field. Religions are insufficient. Law, legality, justice, systems, morality, all have broken down. Political, administrative structures, management structures, educational systems, everything is broken down or has been proved insufficient. Why? Because nature everywhere is pushing to rise beyond these mentally formed systems and structures. The nature of any system is that there is a greater system against which this is flawed and limited. It is compelling us to outgrow rule-based, structure-based, system-based living to consciousness fundamentally changed and liberated in a higher poise, living from a freer and higher and truer consciousness, from which spontaneously all the things which these systems try to imitate can flow, and we can begin to live in a liberated consciousness with a liberated mind, liberated life energy, and a greater perfect and even I would say beautiful expression in life of our diviner potential. Individually, when we all begin to make that change of transformation, it reflects in our collective life, which also rises and is transformed in our collective experience. And this is the nature of what is visioned in our tradition as the Deva Sangha, the divine community. And each one of us who is seeking the true sense of yoga, and whatever the particular aspect or form of practice we may begin with, must keep in mind that this is the greater goal. If the goal is limited, you will never get to anything worthwhile. If you aim at the greater goal, you may fall short, but you will always grow beyond your capacity of conception of what you are capable of and your true, innate, divine potential. So I will pause with this, and perhaps we can move to the next step of our program, and discussion and question answer.
The first thing that struck me, Sraddhalu, is that there is, the Yoga Sutra is my central book, right? And there's so many things you've said, which is like a gist of many of the ideas, like almost like a condensed version. So I was quite thrilled with it. I just want to reflect on one or two, very interesting parallels. One is this whole thing of Leela and the immanence and the transcendence, because the Yoga Sutra says that Purusha and Prakriti came together so that they could realize their full potential. And once they realize their full potential, they go back into quietness and come again whenever they feel like it. Such a beautiful conception of life. Yeah. The other thing that struck me was also that the Yoga Sutra makes a distinction between Smriti and Smaram. Smriti is the memory of the mind of the external world, and Smaram is the memory that you were talking about of our divine origins and all of that. And we often cover it up with the engagement with the world in front of us, trying to solve our problems and so on. That this phenomenal, power of the mind that's available to us in the form of Smaram, we never know how to reach out to it. Yeah. Anyway, there were so many of these parallels.
Even in the principle of the Tantra, you see, described in just that one phrase, Ishwar Pranidhana.
Correct.
And it is so fundamental to yoga.
Yeah.
In the quest, even in the spiritual quest, as soon as you seek something higher and greater than yourself, how can you ever outthink your mind into something greater than mind? You cannot. The only thing you can do is put yourself in relation to that and then allow it to fill you and take you up into itself. And this principle is so fundamental to the nature of transformation and to the yoga itself. But since people are more focused on body health, these things are completely forgotten. The Yoga Sutras are so profound, but to fully appreciate them, and they're sutras, so you have to just go plunge into their full deeper sense.
Yeah. The other thing that, in a sense, is a question that I'm very fond of, and many people ask this, is a sacred quest possible as a grihastha? And my entire focus or whatever is to say that every rishi was a grihastha. Janaka is the greatest rishi. He's the greatest grihastha. Yeah. So if you can spread, if you can talk about that a little bit, and what Sri Aurobindo and the mother might have said about a grihastha's practice, I think it will be very useful, Sraddhalu.
You made this very interesting observation, saying that Janaka is the greatest. Why is it the greatest? We have equally extraordinary rishis, but who did not have the mastery of the world the way Janaka had. Janaka was a master king of the material rule, as well as master of the spiritual domain. You see, this idea of the equal mastery of the two domains is also prevalent in other traditions outside India. In Egypt, for example, the early pharaohs, the later ones were an imitation, but the early pharaohs were spiritual beings. And the idea of putting them in the sarcophagus inside the mountain, they were never put in pyramids. They were put in the sarcophagus inside the mountains in the Valley of the Kings. And the idea there was the same idea of the samadhi. A spiritually realized being is as if fixed into the earth so that his realization is held for humanity's help. And these kings, they had a double cap, which represented Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. That's how it's understood today. And they turn it into physical territory. No, these were masters of the upper realm and the lower realm equally, as the Isha Upanishad demands of us. Mastery of the knowledge of oneness, mastery of the knowledge of multiplicity. And so, true yoga, if you look at the concept, of entering in relation and immersion and even realization of the divine cannot be constrained by anything. Think about it this way. If there was something in the world which could prevent you from reaching self, then it would be not self. Since everything is essentially self, everything can become a means to realize the divine. This is at the principle level. Now, in the technology of the yoga, when we say, or there are traditions which would say you cannot do it if you are in the worldly life. But again, this idea does not exist. It is only there in the ascetic phase. Once the world was discarded as the goal and the goal was outside the world, then you had to make a choice. But if you go to the original sense and if you go to the Vedic tradition, the idea of the divine was Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahman. In that, therefore, there is nothing which is fundamentally an error or a limitation or something that traps or prevents. I'm going to put it another way, in a very different formulation. If your goal is to realize the divine outside space and time and outside the world, then everything in the world is a trap. And so the ascetic path is extremely painful because you have to keep cutting, chopping everything down to your own instincts. Your own drive to realize the divine is your barrier. You have to cut that also. What are you ending with? It's a very difficult, very painful path of great struggle. Slowly, eventually, someday you will reach. Now replace this with this perspective that everything is an expression of the divine. Everything is struggling to realize the divine more and more completely. And now when you look at your body, your mind, your emotions, and the world around you, everything is trying to seek the divine. Everything is there to help you to realize the divine. The only difference is, do you use it to help you realize the divine, or do you use it to serve your own immediate short-term ego desire impulse? And you are free to do that also. That's your choice. But if you seek something higher, the same means can be now turned towards the divine. This becomes the basis for the Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, or Jnana Yoga, which take the three impulses within us of forward movement and turn them to the divine. So Karma Yoga, for example, says, you cannot avoid action. If nothing else, you're breathing. If nothing else, you're aware, you're thinking. Something always is in action in you. So why even fight action? Why withdraw? Fulfill action. And what is the fulfillment of action? Remember, that from which everything originates, that into which everything goes. So turn your actions towards the divine. You may build a skyscraper, you may build a whole empire, you may craft a tiny, perfect form of some sculpture or painting. Turn it towards the divine. It does not matter what you do. There is no work which is small or big. All becomes sacred by turning to the divine. All becomes pointless when you turn it to short-term, narrow objectives. Well, it still goes to the divine, but now by an indirect route. So if you think about this, it does not matter what you're doing. Are you married or not has no meaning. Do you have children or not has no meaning. The question is, how do you live your life? How do you relate to your family or your children? My teacher, M.P. Pandit, he was approached by somebody who was seeking to enter into a living practice of yoga. And at some point he had children and he came to my teacher and said, how should I relate to my children? And my teacher said, treat them not as your children, treat them as the children of the divine and serve them as you would the divine. Now you just think of the implications of that. Every time you look at the children, you are conscious that within their heart is the divine presence, the divine spark, the soul, and you are serving that. Even if you have to scold the child, you're aware that it is only for the furtherance of the soul's emergence and the diviner possibilities. Your entire life becomes divine in service, in consecration. So there's nothing fundamentally in life that can prevent you from going to the divine. In fact, all is there to aid you if you use it. So the Karma Yoga comes from this basis of action turned to the divine. Similar idea, within you is an impulse of desire. And in its highest form, it is not a personal desire, but a desire of self-giving, to love, to care, to give the best that you have. Well, you could give it to all, or you could give it to the divine in all, or the divine in the universe. And in this way, the turn of the heart in sacred love and self-giving to the divine becomes the basis of Bhakti Yoga. And similarly, Jnana Yoga, the mind's need to understand. You see, even little baby, when you show him an object, he will first try to understand. And if he cannot understand, he starts crying. Even he can't articulate why he cannot understand, but he cries because something is wrong. Mind's need to know can be turned to perception of the divine presence in all things, that which is permanent, that which is lasting, which upholds, which supports, which originates. And as you begin to perceive, you begin to see what an extraordinary intelligence is behind this whole working of the universe. And the heart opens in love and devotion to this wonderful thing. And the love that you experience towards that is then met by the love that flows from it. And automatically your works grow in sacred self-giving. And the three paths merge. This is Sri Krishna's primary training in the Bhagavad Gita. The triple path. It is not three separate paths. It is one triple path of which you have three separate starting points. And nowhere here does it matter what your responsibilities in life are. Whatever your work, whatever your responsibility, whatever your circumstance or family, you can practice this. The concept of not having to take a family life came from some of the more specialized paths which were highly demanding. Like Hatha Yoga in its totality demands a full-time 100% focus to achieve something extraordinary, which is a full perfection of your potential. Or Raja Yoga also in its totality would demand something like that. And as such, you have to make a choice. You cannot compromise. You cannot say, I will do this and that, and they are as if seen to be in conflict with each other. You cannot say, I will serve my ego desire while I will surrender my heart to the divine. That's a contradiction in terms. But nothing prevents you in the form of work to be doing that consecrated work. So, yes, there is a truth to that. If you want to realize the divine, you have to dedicate yourself entirely. But it doesn't mean you have to give up anything of your life. You dedicate yourself entirely in everything you do in life. Or I'll put it in another way. If you want to build a successful business, you have to dedicate yourself entirely to it. And your family and your relationship with your husband, wife, children, relatives is equally turned towards that. Otherwise, you will not succeed in anything. But it's the same truth for the spiritual life equally. You want to realize the divine? Well, all your business and all your responsibilities are equally turned towards that. Nothing prevents you from fulfilling them though. In fact, as a result of this diviner turn, all that you do in your business or in your life and your responsibilities will be that much more effective, but also satisfying to you. Because every step is growing closer in service and love to the divine, filling you in return with the divine love. So yes, if you take to the path of yoga, you have to dedicate yourself if you aim for that. But that dedication will just consume everything of your life and fulfill everything at the same time. That would be the best way.
Can we take a couple of questions, Hari?
Yeah, sure, Rako. Thank you, Sraddhalu. So we have a question from Sukhwinder Sarkar. She's asking, this is relating to the earlier reference to memory. So as there are different koshas with their unique intelligence, is there different types or grades of memory, remembrance as we move to more and more subtler realms? Is longing also a kind of memory?
Very interesting question. In fact, you see, unfortunately, we are all heavily formed by the Western European model of ourselves, okay, and of reality. So we are taught memory is in your brain. No, in fact, in the yoga, there is the term used chitta. Chitta as substance of the mental consciousness. Not chit, but chitta, in which things happen in the mind awareness. And the very nature of chitta is to recall and remember every imprint that comes into it. Extend this now into all the domains. In every domain, in all substance, because all is substance of the one, chit in essence, but all is substance of the same one. In everything there is impression which remains, and that is memory. So even if you sit on a chair or a stone for a few minutes, you leave, the warmth of your impression is there, or the stress of the impression is there, and it's a memory in matter, isn't it? There's evidence today that if you take, for example, water and put it in contact with an object and shake it, then you take out the object, the water molecular structure retains the memory of that object and actually qualitatively changes to represent the quality of that object. This is the basis of homeopathy, by the way, but this is validated by very physical conventional sciences, the memory in water. So yes, everything has memory all the way down. But the lower you go in grades of consciousness, the more the memory becomes dull and difficult to access and rigid. The higher you go, the more the memory is clear, free, open, and awake and aware of itself, which is what the character of our mind. But there is a deeper memory, what you asked about longing, deep within us. What is our deepest longing is for the ideal. There is this story in the yoga tradition of the deer, the musk deer, which smells this perfume and looks for the source and starts running. But the moment it starts running, it loses the smell. And so it runs harder and still loses even more. That's our life, chasing after things outside for satisfaction. And then exhausted, it stops, and once again the smell comes back because it comes from its own source, from within its own consciousness. And this is the nature of our human life. What you seek as true love, true happiness, true satisfaction, true friendship, whatever it is you're looking for, true security that is becoming more and more important today, or even true power, true knowledge. All these are essentially within you because they exist within you. You know it is possible and you seek for it outside you. And while seeking outside is our first instinct and necessary perhaps to our immediate development of the outer part of personality, and you do satisfy yourself by learning things, reading books, acquiring skills, wonderful, but then you feel something missing. And the deeper longing now begins to awaken, which says, yes, but there's something more. After all this fame, all this skill, all this mastery of my particular field, I feel I'm missing something more, which is possible. And that's when you are called to turn within. And the deeper memory of the soul is calling you. And the soul's memory is the memory of Satchidananda, because we are all our souls are emanations like a spark from the main fire. We are emanations of Satchidananda. If you recall the line in the Veda, the rishis celebrate our existence as children of immortality. Shrinvantu vai amritasya putraha. You are children of immortality. And if you are children of immortality, your inheritance is also of that Satchidananda. But as children, we first forgot our source. But the deeper longing of the soul recalls there's something important after we have exhausted everything else. It calls us back to that, to realize that immortality here in life and to make life a divine life. There's another beautiful question I would like to read out. This is from Kanti Katepalli. She says, I have this image of Krishna with universe in his mouth when asked to open. And she says, Krishna is present and in him the universe. Then where am I located? Inside him or outside? It's a very important question also. Look at it this way. The divine we tend to limit to one aspect. So either he is in the universe or universe is inside him. But what if both are true at the same time? Because now you have to look at it in a slightly different way, and we're not used to it. So it's initially you make a shift, but once you make the shift, you'll never lose it. The analogy you may give of a mother who is giving birth to a child. What is the body of the child formed of? It is the tissue of her own body which becomes the child. Now in the divine consciousness, in the origin, there is nothing other than that. So when the universe is born, it is out of the divine consciousness that the universe is born, and everything that exists is essentially substance of Satchidananda. But on the other hand, when there is this flowing out into forms, where does it flow into? There is nothing other than him, so it flows into him. The entire birth and unfolding of the universe takes place within the divinity and the infinity of that Satchidananda. So yes, both are true. The divine is immanent in everything, but everything is held by the transcendence of the divine from outside space and time and from within space and time. So think of it this way: when you look at the universe in this way, as the body of the divine, and we are looking at only the most material part of the body, it's like ant looking at the elephant's toe, not knowing of the full elephant, wandering on the elephant's toe, not knowing the whole reality. So we are looking at the most material part of the universe, and it's so beautiful. Everything is beautiful in the universe, except when we come and mess it up. But everything is spontaneously beautiful because it expresses the divine or strives to express the divine. But at the same time, the divine is in everything and in within us. So we have actually three relationships with the divine. One is the experience of the divine within us. Sri Krishna is the Lord within your heart. He is you, or rather, your deepest reality, or you are nothing but a part of his consciousness. You have no separate existence. You are the gopi who yearns to join and merge with him. That is one experience. The other experience is the realization of the divine around you. Every form conceals him. Every form is a mask through which he plays, taunts you and nudges you and wakes you from your sleep and calls you to realize him. Where? In every form, as much as within you. Because if he is within you, he is equally within all. And you must realize him there also and play with him through those forms. That's the second realization. And there's a third, which is after all these, he still stands above, free of them all, as the ultimate magnet of our journey of evolution and rising and transformation. You know, the word Krishna, people don't know its true sense. We say Krishna because Krishna, the word means black. Yeah, he was dark-skinned. No, that's wrong, completely wrong. The word Krishna, you go back to the Sanskrit root, Krish is the same root as Akarshana, attraction. So he is called Krishna because he is that he who draws you to himself, the most seductive presence, influence, and power in the universe, because the entire universe bursting out of his heart and love is then pulled back by his love, the most powerful attraction of love in the universe. It is the aspect of the divine, by definition, the highest personality of the divine that turns to embrace the universe with love and draw it back to his oneness and delight. So there is the third experience of Sri Krishna as transcending space and time, embracing space and time and drawing it all back into his oneness and holding it in his oneness. So this is one way in which, these are three ways in which you will relate to the divine. But there's another aspect which comes with the Tantra, where his power, his creative power, his energy, which is Krishna and Kali, pours out in the universe and she leads you to him. So you put yourself in her hands as the Divine Mother and she takes you to the highest realization of the Lord. So there are many ways in which you can relate, and the nature of the sadhana changes depending on these relations. If you have the most complete perspective, you can also have simultaneously the most complete and the most naturally easy sadhana, in which she carries you to the Lord, and you have the delight at each step of the journey.
So, next question is from Ranu Mishra. What does it mean to turn the action and its outcome to divine? Is it selfless charity or generosity?
Yes, so all these generosity, charity are very good, but they are human moral constructs. Why are you generous? Because, well, you should be sharing what you have got. You have taken so much from society, you must give it back. And with it, there is the assertion of the ego of the generous person who says, I am so generous. You see, there's a beautiful story again in the yoga tradition of the disciple who approaches his master and says, I want to be your humblest of disciples. And the master says, even in humility, you want to be the greatest. See, the problem with these constructs is that, they're just constructs. The nature of the karma yoga and the consecration bypasses all these constructs. They come from the recognition that in any case, whatever you do, it's going to the divine. Try to not send it to the divine. You throw it in the waste paper bin, you throw it in the machine that crushes it, it's still going to the divine. There's nothing other than him. In fact, you do nothing, still you end up pouring all your energies into the divine. And on the other hand, where did your energy come from? Where did your intelligence come from? Where did your love and affection come from? You didn't create it, you didn't invent it. It comes from the divine. So your impulse to action is from him. The goal of the action is anyway going to him. What are you in the middle? You don't matter. Rather, what can matter is you can choose to participate in the joy of that self-giving, or you can choose not to participate and choose to be miserable and say, I'm a victim of circumstance. That's the difference of yoga and not yoga, or rather conscious yoga and unconscious yoga. Sri Aurobindo makes this very interesting observation, because ultimately everything happening in life is pushing you to grow and evolve. And so he says there is this large, massive, unconscious yoga of nature by which everything is growing anyway. You do nothing, after 1,000,000 years you will evolve. Into that now, when you wake up sufficiently and you say, but this is what I'm seeking and this is what I want, I'm not going to wait 1,000,000 years because I can attain it in this lifetime. Then you do the very same process, now you do it consciously and participating in the process, and therefore speed it up, and that we will call now conscious yoga, and therefore accelerated evolution. So the whole principle of the Karma Yoga comes from this recognition. Anyway, it comes from the Lord and flows to the Lord. What can you do? By participating in this yajna, because the whole of the movement of life is a yajna, by participating in the yajna, you have the delight of the yajna. The benefit of the soma, which is awakened in the yajna, is yours to participate in and to partake in. And so it does not come from any artificial construct of generosity and goodwill and you must be nice and do good, do bad. None of these matter. So you can start with this idea, or you can start with the heart's perception. Whatever I do, however much I do, its value is only if I share it with the Lord. And again, you don't do it for generosity. You do it because that gives you the joy of sharing with the Lord. And you turn it to that. That's all. So the nature of the yoga process outgrows these superficialities.
I just add something here, Sraddhalu.
Yeah.
There's a very clear injunction in yoga that any action that is tinged by guilt or shame is a self-destructive action. So much of this idea of generosity and philanthropy is often tinged with some of this.
Yes. And often they also bind you further into your sense of self-importance, which is great. Please feel important. But there are many reasons to feel important. You can feel important because I am superior to that fellow and I need to beat him down to prove my superiority. Or you can feel important because you are a unique expression of the divine presence within you. And there's nothing more beautiful than that expression, without which the universe would be missing something wonderful. And so can you be worthy of that, and can you manifest that more? And you can be the most important person and equally recognize the most important center in each other. And that would be the way of the yogi. A lot of these concepts of egoism are very fake constructs, and people keep fighting their ego when in fact that's not the way you will be free of it. Egoism, by definition, is only self-limitation. Egoism or ego is limitation and binding into boundaries. Egoism is a reference to your boundaries as the most important thing. That's all. The moment you open to something greater than yourself and you have the joy of that opening, your ego will begin to thin out. You don't need to fight it. Rather, focus on the joy of that giving and participation in something greater. And it can be a greater ideal, not necessarily directly to the divine. To serve the country, to serve an ideal greater than yourself, your ego will open out and experience something more. And of course, if you realize the divine in the country as Bharat Mata is not merely a construct of our imagination, she is a manifestation of the Divine Mother, and you serve her in serving the country, you serve her in serving society, you serve her in serving your family, well, you have the most complete satisfaction there.
Thank you. We are almost time to close. We have one more question, which maybe I can share. This is from Anjani. She asked, in the Ishopanishad, there are two pairs that are similar: Vidya, Avidya, and Samputi, Vinash.
Yes.
What is the difference between the two?
So in what I was describing earlier, the knowledge of oneness, knowledge of multiplicity, these two are complementary. in the whole experience of reality, you'll find these two always blending into each other. Vidya is the knowledge of oneness. So in popularly, the way it's articulated is a kind of a reduced and therefore flawed version when they say Vidya is knowledge of spiritual and Avidya is knowledge of material. No, that's not it. Or Avidya is inferior. No, that's not it. In fact, the Isha very clearly says the two are equally important in relation to each other. So knowledge of oneness and knowledge of multiplicity. Now you enter into matter as a scientist. You can divide and know the knowledge of differences. You create your table of elements. So each element is different from each other. That's the avidya aspect. Then you go into the vidya aspect. What makes all these elements the same? They're all variations of proton, electron, neutron differently arranged. So the underlying unity knowledge is the vidya aspect. The vidya aspect liberates you from appearances. You see the underlying oneness. The avidya aspect gives you mastery of the multiplicity and the divine in expression. And so both are complementing each other and both have to be realized. Vidyamcha, avidyamcha, the one who knows both is the one who knows truly. Now, this is in the domain of the manifestation. Then there is the other pair of the Isha Upanishad, Sambhuti and Vinasha, that is being and a non-being. So this is the consciousness which is in manifestation, and then there's the consciousness which transcends, which turns to the absolute, which is beyond manifestation. And this is the second pair, which also has to be realized. And you must know the divine in both. And what you will see in many of the ascetic traditions, they turn only to that which is out beyond. And so it is called Vinasham because in immersion in that, you lose yourself or the world itself is lost in that immersion. But between the two, again, there's an equality or a complementarity. You must know both. By Vinasha, you are liberated. That is, in the transcendent consciousness, your consciousness is liberated from all illusory appearances, but not illusion. The world is in appearance is illusory, but the reality of the world is the Satchidananda. But you must be free of the reality, the appearance of illusion to be able to see the reality of the world. But then in the other movement, in the Sambhuti, it says you will attain immortality. Interesting. In the manifestation is the fulfillment of the Satchidananda. In the immersion is transcendence. Where is the question of Satchidananda? But it is only when the transcendence chooses to know itself and manifest itself that you have the whole experience of Satchidananda and therefore the immortality. So this becomes again a complementing pair. And in the nature of the yoga, we experience both pairs. First, the vidya, avidya, knowledge of oneness, knowledge of multiplicity. And then in the final step, there is the knowledge of the transcendence. And then the re-embracing of the world from transcendence. The way the Lord embraces the world, you embrace the world with Him or as a part of His embrace. And that's when you know the world truly and can play and participate in the Leela. So perhaps if you're going to close now, can I make a few closing observations just to summarize some of the important things here? You see, in the nature of the yoga, we as seekers, practitioners of the real sense of yoga, we have to transcend these limited definitions and turn to the true sense of yoga itself as a science as well as a technology. And when we look at it in its totality, not in fragments, we realize that the entire journey that we are already in is a journey of yoga, but unconscious or semi-conscious, half awake. And when we choose a life of yoga, we only make it more awake, more conscious, and more consciously engaged in relation with the divine, with the Lord and His Shakti. And by placing ourselves in her hands, she carries us more easily than we could with our effort. So, Ramakrishna Paramahansa had this beautiful analogy of two paths of yoga, or rather two kinds of practice of yoga. The more ascetic and personally willed practice is the way of the baby monkey. So the baby monkey, what does it do? In order to be able to cross from one tree to another, it has to hold its mother by the neck, and the mother jumps from branch to branch, carrying the baby. But if the baby loses his grip, he falls. And the nature of the yoga is, whatever effort you may make, finally you are dependent on her carrying you. So you grip her, you tight, and then if somehow your entire effort flags, you fall. And then you again pick yourself up. And The other way is the way of the baby cat. The baby cat puts itself in conscious surrender to the Divine Mother. The mother picks it up by the scruffs of the neck and carries it from branch to branch. The responsibility of carrying and the burden of the effort is in her hands, not in yours. In practice, there's a blending of both. You have to make an effort to be able to put yourself in her hands. To that extent, your personal effort is necessary. But the more you are able to give yourself, the more easily she is able to carry you, and the more completely she is able to carry you. And that journey is the journey not only of awakening, but of transformation, where she fills you and becomes you. And this is epitomized in a very beautiful mantra. Sri Aurobindo says it is a mantra given for India's awakening, and that is the song that we know as Vande Mataram. And as long as people sang it, India awoke and became free. But when we became free, we discarded this mantra and put in its place something which was of a very different meaning. But in this mantra, the Rishi Bankim Chandra describes the relationship with Mother India as the Divine Mother. And he says, in my heart, you are the devotion. Hridoye tumi ma bhakti. He says, Bahute tumi ma shakti. In my arms, you are the strength, the power. In my mind, you are the intelligence. And it is your image that I install in temple and temple. Tumari pratima, mandire mandire. Mandire is, the temple is your heart. When you invoke the Divine Mother, or you awaken to the presence of the Divine Lord and the Divine Mother within you, and your heart becomes the temple, and you realize the love within you is her love, the strength in you is her strength, the intelligence is hers, and you give these to her in consecration, in gratitude and self-giving, she fills you and amplifies all these powers which are hers. She leads you, and as you worship her, your life grows to become a sacred life. And to serve the Divine Mother as Mother India is one of the easiest ways to be able to put into practice these relationships with the Divine in our daily life. And I would exhort all of you not only to have a personal relationship, but equally in the collective relationship to serve the Divine as Mother India. And it is one of the most beautiful and fulfilling experiences.